This clip right here might currently be the most controversial and most watched clip in relation to Battlefield 6 right now. If you're unfamiliar with this, a streamer by the name of RileyCS posted a highlights clip on Battlefield 6 showing them flicking to various characters in the game and getting a pretty large succession of kills. This clip and the series of clips that have been posted by them have been instantly reacted to by most of the internet, accusing RileyCS of cheating. So much so that their Twitch account was spam reported by various users and was temporarily banned, but has since been re-enabled as Twitch recognized it was actually spamming and not because they had been banned in a game, which is a grounds for your account to be terminated on Twitch. And for the record, RileyCS has not been banned in Battlefield 6. Now, we're going to discuss this clip in this video today, but also some very interesting things that Battlefield 6's Anticheat is doing and achieving that haven't been talked about on the internet yet. In fact, it's completely floated under the radar, but I have some information and I figured I'd share it to you, so make sure you stay tuned to that. And also, please consider subscribing as well, because we're on the road to 200k and it would be greatly useful. The fascinating thing about this is something that I've alluded to often, is that high skill gaming and cheating often look like two sides of the same coin. Now, we'll talk about whether or not RileyCS is cheating in this video a little bit later, but generally speaking, some of the best FPS players in the world are constantly accused of cheating, and flick looking in particular and flick shooting isn't even new to Battlefield. Back in the days of the old school ESL 1 era, where Battlefield 4 was a competitive esport, it was extremely common for this kind of player to play and compete in Battlefield 4. One of the most infamous highlights and competitive players from back in the day was Rela, and Rela had clips that, quite frankly, you would consider to be cheating. But everybody knows that Rela is just a high-skill player who has since retired from the scene and is just one of the best in the business. So these sorts of flick looks, these sorts of clips of highlight reels of players darting around Battlefield and putting together incredible feeds with flicking aim is not really new. But the outrage that these clips have caused is pretty new. I mean, the sheer volume of accusations of cheating were incredibly high. And I'll be perfectly honest, as somebody who has played a lot of Warzone over the last couple of years, where the game is effectively inundated with cheaters constantly, it was incredibly easy even for me, as somebody who experiences high-level FPS players quite frequently in the creation space, to look at that clip and go, damn, that's kind of sus. Now, as for whether or not RileyCS is cheating, I'm honestly just going to stay out of the debate. And the reason for that is just that I'm just not qualified enough to have that conversation. Now, I've been playing Warzone primarily for the last couple of years, and I could probably tell you if somebody is cheating in Warzone 90% of the time just because of the amount of hours that I've racked up in that game, whilst also playing some comp games. And as somebody who very fortunately managed to compete at the World Series of Warzone, I can tell you that the line between somebody cheating and between them just being a fantastically good player is actually pretty slim. So as for a judgment on RileyCS, I would defer to Enders, who is definitely far more qualified to talk about it, and he has a very good breakdown video discussing the clips that Riley had posted, and I would highly recommend checking out Enders' video. What I will say though is that the weird personal attacks on any content creator, including Riley, are really strange. Granted, I hate cheaters as much as the next person, but as a content creator who is regularly accused of cheating myself, the kind of weird dogpile that this has created is just not really for me. And this actually leads me on to what this video is about, which is Battlefield 6's Anticheat, which is actually doing some pretty interesting things behind the scene that nobody has really clocked onto and nobody is talking about. Now, publicly speaking, Javelin's Anticheat has stopped 330,000 players from tampering with the game. Most of those will probably be repeat accounts or possibly even entire manufacturers for cheaters trying to break into the game or use the beta as essentially their own beta to figure out cheating for this title. So 330,000 attempts have been stopped during the beta so far, and 44,000 players were reported on day 1, with 60,000 players reported on day 2. But at a very basic level, in less than a single beta weekend, 330,000 attempts to tamper with the game, and likely a large number of bans as a result from that, have entered into Battlefield 6, which is highly efficient for an anti-cheat that also is in beta stages, and is also dealing with a free access situation. And what I mean by that is that anybody can play the beta. Now, when Battlefield 6 launches, obviously there will be a free-to-play segment of the game, but the actual multiplayer experience is going to be locked behind a pretty hefty paywall, meaning the incurred cost to people who try to cheat in the game, and if the anti-cheat is efficient, is going to be really, really high and dramatically reduce the number of cheaters that are available in Battlefield 6. And to the best of our knowledge, Battlefield 6 will not be available on any subscription service except for EA Play Pro, which is also not a cheap membership. But will Battlefield 6's Javelin anti-cheat actually be good? Now, the entire FPS industry, if we're being perfectly honest, is currently scarred by Ricochet anti-cheat, which has been wholly ineffective at dealing with cheaters in Call of Duty Warzone. And on the flip side of that coin, Apex Legends has had cheating problems. Valorant, which is the industry diamond for anti-cheat, has ups and downs, but is universally regarded as a very good anti-cheat that causes a lot of trouble for cheaters. Now, you also have to bear in mind that Valorant is a free-to-play game that anybody can access on any system, so their efficiency with dealing with cheaters is actually incredibly high when you consider just how easy the barrier to entry is for a game like that. Now, somewhat controversially, because people don't like touching their bios or perhaps aren't the most technologically inclined, Battlefield 6 decided to launch with a requirement for Secure Boot to be enabled. Secure Boot is really interesting because whilst it isn't a silver bullet and EA have publicly admitted that it's not a silver bullet and it isn't going to end cheating, it adds a number of hurdles to people who are trying to inject cheats into Battlefield 6. It allows them to use TPM, which is the Trusted Platform Module, a dedicated security chip on motherboards, allowing them to deal with things like hardware ID spoofers, so that if Battlefield decides to ban somebody and ban their hardware ID, including their motherboard, how easily they get back into the game by spoofing that ID, which is what happens very commonly in Call of Duty Warzone, is substantially more challenging. And as something I've spoken about in regards to Ricochet anti-cheat, the more hurdles that are added in the way of cheaters, the less likelihood you are to run into them. Now, prolific cheaters who are spending lots of money acquiring third-party hardware like DMA devices will likely still get in drips and drabs, but the biggest issue with cheating and why Call of Duty Warzone has suffered so greatly is because they've been prone to and exposed to by people who literally just run a basic EXE. Literally any 14-year-old with a credit card can cheat in Call of Duty, and that has been why that game has been an absolute nightmare. For those of you who are a little less technologically inclined, Secure Boot is essentially a security blanket between your operating system and the hardware available on your actual PC. And it essentially creates a communication bridge that validates security between those various devices. The operating system can confirm that nothing's been injected and compromised. The hardware also goes through similar checks using the TPM chip, and essentially they create an ecosystem where they can confirm that during the boot up of your PC as it fires on, nothing has been tampered with. When Secure Boot isn't enabled, cheaters often try to use this to manipulate games before actually even launching the game or whilst the system's actually firing up itself. They'll do kernel-level cheats that basically operate at the base level of your system, rootkits, they can manipulate memory and inject things into the memory of your system, they can spoof hardware IDs, and they can also run things like virtual machines and emulation, and tamper directly with the anti-cheat before it has the opportunity to get off the ground. Now, very infamously, Valorant's Vanguard anti-cheat is a kernel zero anti-cheat that operates from the second you launch your PC, and also uses TPM in order to verify that nothing has been compromised, which is why Valorant is so successful. Now, this is where things get interesting for Battlefield 6 in particular, because we've kind of had our first information or inkling as to just how effective Javelin could be when it formally releases. A number of people on Reddit and also a number of people on social media posted that Battlefield 6 was prompting them to uninstall or turn off Valorant in order to be able to play Battlefield 6. Now, many people dismiss this as just a bug or Battlefield incorrectly detecting Valorant as problematic, but the reality is actually far more interesting. Now, Valorant's anti-cheat and the way it operates rushes to essentially all of the drivers on your system, and in basic terms, tries to secure itself from every angle of attack. In driver terms, in terms of injections, in terms of code injections, the Valorant anti-cheat creates its own security net to make it a highly efficient anti-cheat. The reason why Javelin was telling people to disable or uninstall Valorant was because Javelin is using more or less identical tools in terms of how it's approaching its anti-cheat. And this has been confirmed by the people who create Valorant Vanguard, who tweeted, "Vanguard is compatible with Javelin, and you don't need to uninstall one anti-cheat to use the other." However, Battlefield 6 does not currently allow the Valorant client to be running simultaneously because both drivers race to protect regions of the game memory with the same technique. And essentially in layman's terms, what this means is that Battlefield 6 is using a very similar toolset to Valorant Vanguard in order to achieve security in Battlefield 6. So much so that the actual anti-cheat drivers for both games have ended up interacting with one another, where Battlefield 6's Javelin system is so focused on making sure that it can create a security net for itself that Valorant's Vanguard was actually getting in the way of it doing that. Now, the creators behind Javelin's anti-cheat have said that they're going to update the error messaging in the future to make it clear that these two clients can't be run at the same time. And almost hilariously, this has accidentally possibly created the first collaboration between brands. Now, although they will unlikely officially collaborate on this unless something changes, essentially Riot and EA have two anti-cheats that do the same thing so effectively that they kind of interrupt each other, and that you cannot run Battlefield 6 and Javelin if Valorant's Vanguard is operating at the same time. Now, Valorant's Vanguard anti-cheat is considered to be widely the most successful anti-cheat in the industry. It isn't perfect, and it also isn't a silver bullet to cheating in any video game, but the reality is it's incredibly successful considering that Valorant is a free-to-play game, and does an exceptionally good job at securing Valorant away from cheaters. So what does this mean for Battlefield 6 and Javelin? Well, there are still question marks. The reality is, even though they are using similar toolsets, it could be that Valorant's still more efficient, it could be that there are technical flaws with EA's Javelin, it could be that there are differences that make them discernibly less efficient or more efficient than the other. And those things are just things that we'll have to observe over time. However, considering 330,000 attempts were already blocked, and also considering that I didn't run into a single cheater in 40 hours of gameplay, it's pretty safe to say that this is an impressive first step in the right direction. Having a similar toolset to what Valorant is trying to do, or at least pushing in that direction and aiming for what is essentially the industry diamond, can only be a good thing. And then you also have to bear in mind that the majority of Battlefield 6 is going to be a paid-for experience, and won't be free-to-play accessible in the same way that Valorant is. That if somebody is banned in Battlefield 6, the money to get back in and continue cheating exponentially increases over time. And whilst this won't stop certain rampant cheaters who are hell-bent on doing it, it's going to stop the most problematic kind of cheater, which is the 14-year-old with mum's credit card, where they constantly re-download cheats, buy new ones, do all the little simple EXE things, because it's just that easy. Like I mentioned before in this video, the issue with Call of Duty's Ricochet anti-cheat is that it was so wildly ineffective at what it did that pretty much anybody could cheat for a fairly decent period of time before getting banned. And even if they did get banned, there was nothing like Secure Boot, although that is allegedly coming to Call of Duty in the future, to prevent them from easily being able to change their hardware ID and dive straight back in. Battlefield 6, by the looks of things, isn't going to have any of those issues. There is already Secure Boot and TPM checks in place, which is going to make hardware ID spoofing dramatically harder, and also the banning systems that we've seen so far seem to illustrate that they've got a pretty good laser-guided focus on things. Whilst it's not going to stop cheating, and I don't think it's going to be a silver bullet, it will greatly reduce the number of them that you will see. And most importantly, it means that the paid version of the game is going to see substantially less of them. Now, the free-to-play element of Battlefield 6 is very likely still going to deal with some cheaters here or there, but that paywall that we've been talking about is going to be very effective at stopping a good number of them. We can only hope and keep our fingers crossed that this is all good signs and good indications of what we can expect from Battlefield 6 going forward, and for the most part, from a technical standpoint, it seems like an incredibly good first step. Now, I do think there is merit to a developer, or at least a publisher's intentions in terms of what they say they're going to do. Now, and this sounds petty, and I know it does sound very, conflicting, and it feels like I'm down-talking Call of Duty, but Call of Duty have been unwilling to put barriers up to entry for Warzone because they're worried about their player count, and that is just simply the truth. They've pretty much outright refused to do anything that requires players to go through extra steps, including back in the day when they very briefly required people to have two-factor authentication, and that was instantly taken away because they lost so many players that they decided against it. Conversely, Battlefield 6 has basically said, if you want to play this game, you are going to need Secure Boot, and quite frankly, they don't seem to care whether or not that's a problem for you guys. And that's good. That's a great decision in my view. They don't care about losing players if it means the majority of people in the game are actually having a more secure experience. And then on top of that, Battlefield is also featuring console-first matchmaking, which means that although the game is crossplay, there will be a focus that allows players who are on console to matchmake with console players first, so that they don't potentially have their experience diluted by PC cheaters. And whilst all of these things like console-first matchmaking and requiring secure boot could alienate players and could potentially reduce the number of people who buy their game, they're doing it anyway, because they just think it makes sense for the security of the title. In comparison, Call of Duty is now releasing secure boot for Call of Duty going forward, but they haven't said that it's coming to Warzone right away. They said that they're going to take some time to implement it, and then maybe it comes down to Warzone later on. The whole thing is just an absolute nightmare. Overarchingly, I think they deserve some praise for having a very aggressive approach to this, and I also appreciate the fact that they haven't made 75 blog posts talking about how they're going to own cheaters and troll them and do all these silly little things to them. They've simply said, this is what we've got, it's not definitely going to work, but we're going to do our best with it. In comparison, we have seen other companies and other franchises make entire blog posts about how many cheaters they've banned, how they're trolling cheaters, and then when you actually load up the game, it's completely the other way around. The anti-cheat doesn't work, and they're getting completely dominated by anybody who can open an exe file. And I guess what this kind of loops back to, especially with the RileyCS clip that we spoke about at the start of this video, is that there is essentially a line where some players are so good you don't actually really know, or most people aren't qualified to make an informed decision as to whether or not they're cheating. I've always said in the Warzone space, unless you're a top 1% player, the difference between you being able to discern if somebody's cheating or just incredibly good is impossible. If an average player tries to make an inference about what a pro player is capable of doing, there is too much of a skill gap there that exists in order for them to make that decision and merit. So just having a good anti-cheat that deals with this so that we aren't having these online debates that actively bans players is already a phenomenal first option. And if that is the case in Battlefield 6, we're heading in exactly the right direction. So folks, let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below. As always, thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe, I'm on the road to 200k, and I'll see you again in the next one.